Hello? Does this thing work? This is the Peak Boredom Podcast.
1, 2, 3.
Hi guys, welcome to the Peak Boredom Podcast. Yay! Today we have Hanne from one of my master's classmates. Is that it? Yeah. And thank you for being here. And today we're going to talk about food and all around things. The dark side of food, the good side of food. Do you want to introduce yourself a bit?
Sure. Just to start, thank you for having me. Thank you for taking the time and giving me the space on your awesome podcast. Really excited to be here, and I'm kind of nervous. So, get the shakes out. So my name is Hanne. I'm a second year Master's of Science in Planning student with Mars at the University of Toronto. I live in Toronto currently. So before doing my master's degree or doing part of it, I went to UBC and I was in the Global Resource Systems program in the Land and Food Systems, there it is, faculty at UBC. And another one of your guests, she actually was in my cohort at GRS, but we never met, and we realized that we were classmates when we met at U of T, which is...
That was funny, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. She probably went to our shared class a lot more than I did because I'm bad to the bone. I'm just kidding. And so there, I studied sustainable food systems, agriculture, and I also kind of looked at the social, economic, and political systems behind agriculture. So I wore a lot of hats. I just wanted to structure my degree to understand the kind of scientific underpinnings of agriculture, and then like what makes an agricultural and food system sustainable was kind of my intention when I entered the program, and it has since morphed into something else. And before I did that, I went to George Brown College in Toronto, and I did the Culinary Management program where I trained to be a chef, and I've been working as one about 10 years on and off. I'd say a good 4 to 5 years solid of just doing that, and then it's kind of petered off as I've gotten more integrated in my studies and I've kind of exited the industry. But I'm still cooking, still active. I'm helping with a friend to do some catering. I eat every day, so the skills I learned just never went away, and that really wraps me up. I've done an urban agricultural internship when I was at UBC for about 8 months, which was nice, and I had the privilege of doing some woofing, which is like volunteer farming, when I was in Indonesia for very, very short periods of time, and I think I got a lot more out of it than my hosts did. They were very, very lovely when I was in Java, and I would love to go back and do it again. It was fantastic. Yeah, so I think that kind of sums me up.
Great. So you talk a lot about food and you've worn so many different hats. You've done the science side, you've done the planning side, you've also done the actual cooking side. So we're interested in asking, what are some foods that you don't eat anymore?
Oh, what do I don't eat anymore? That's a great question. There's no food I don't eat anymore, but the foods I eat least frequently, well, I don't really eat any shrimp. I don't eat shellfish very often. I do like them. I don't eat fish very often. I know, I'm so sorry. It's delicious. Not out of lack of love, but a lot of the shrimp that we get here is generally farmed unsustainably in South Asia or the Gulf of Mexico. So I choose not to eat it just out of desire to be a bit more sustainable. And I don't eat a lot of fish because of, again, there's unsustainable fishing practices. Not to say that there aren't sustainable fishing practices, but personally, I'm just too lazy to do the research and figure it out.
Oh no!
Of course, changes depending on where I am. I ate a little bit more fish when I was in Vancouver. I ate more fish when I was traveling in Thailand, and I was near the coast, but I don't eat a lot of fish now. I will eat some trout here and there that comes from Ontario if it isn't farmed, if it's wild, but yeah, I'm just a little bit too lazy. And I don't eat a lot of red meat. I try not to eat any beef. I just find it too taxing on the environment personally. That said, I cooked some beef last week. It's delicious. I shouldn't do it. I should eat more grass-fed beef if I do eat it. I don't think that this was probably corn-fed beef, but I might be more tempted to eat it if I was in Australia.
I think I eat less beef too.
Mhm.
honestly. What about you, Inga?
I have realized that I eat a lot less pork.
Mhm.
And part of it was because we grew up in Indonesia where it's pretty like not common practice to eat pork anyway outside of
Mhm.
Chinese restaurants.
Yeah.
But then once I went to the UK, I did eat a lot more pork because my friends did enjoy eating pork. But after third year, I just more often than not I avoid pork.
Mhm.
And that's because I used to do experiments that involved pork. And so now just the smell of it just takes me back to the lab and I just cannot eat it anymore.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
definitely some foods that are just like personally I can't eat because of bad memories. Like I will never eat ranch because
Ranch? What?
I
You
was,
don't have to tell us.
well, it's gross, but I can tell you.
Sure. I love your hot takes.
No, this is not a hot take. This is like a ranch trauma of my childhood.
Oh
I had it for like the first time when I was a kid, and like any kid, I immediately overdid it, and then I got sick and threw up ranch and carrot, and I just can't ever eat ranch again. It's so
no. I
gross.
guess that's kind of similar to me with chocolate. I didn't puke chocolate, but when I was moving to Germany, what they were really interested in me because I was the only Asian kid around my neighborhood, so they would give me chocolate all the time, and I was so sick of it. I was like, there's so many other food. That's really the reason why. And then the chocolate I do like, Inga always tells me is like, there's hazelnut in there, right? And I'm like, oh, or like white chocolate. That's not really chocolate. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that explains a lot of stuff.
I don't eat a lot of chocolate either, actually, just out of personal preference. So when all the haters come for us, Mars, we'll band together in our shared dislike of chocolate.
I shared it in my class this Monday in Jason's class. Is one of our profs, and all our other classmates went. And I was just like, no,
Horrified.
nobody's backing me up.
So upsetting. I know.
I don't eat hard candies anymore either. But that was by accident. So what happened was one day in high school, my friend convinced me to actually go through Lent, like actually go through with like the whole idea of Lent.
Mhm.
And he said you need to give up something for 40 days, it'll change you. And I decided like, yeah, you know what, let's go with it. And so I went with hard candy. I decided to like stop completely eating hard candy. And since then, I cannot eat more than one things like jelly beans, gummies, chocolate bars I can't eat too many of unless it's dark chocolate. Hard candies for sure, like I can never do. And another thing I stopped eating was strawberry, like artificial strawberry flavoring.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so what happened was as a kid, I loved the color pink and strawberry milk is pink. See where the story
You're one of them?
I used to be, and then when I was like 5 or 6, I was like, I can't do this. I cannot do strawberry flavoring anymore. Then I completely gave it up.
And did you enjoy eating like hard candies before you gave it up to try for Lent?
I kind of did.
Really?
It was really bad for me because my mom says that my family has a history of diabetes, so I thought, yeah, cut it out. But now I don't crave it, especially since in the UK, sugar. Ooh, yeah. In high school, I also went to America for a summer program, and then I went to Canada to continue like after that trip. And the sugar levels of all the desserts in America and Canada are much higher than I'm used to.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Wow.
Same in the UK, like the sugar levels are ridiculous. So when I cook desserts, I cut down by half because the desserts I'm used to are more Japanese, so they're more subtle in sweetness and flavor.
Yeah.
So I don't crave it anymore because I just eat it and I just get like tingles. Like I can't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, our compliment is, it's not too sweet. That's good.
That's funny.
Okay, so I'm curious, what is it like being a chef? Like coming from a non-culinary background, because I know a lot of people talk about it from a culinary standpoint.
Mm-hmm. So what is it like being a chef from a non-culinary standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, in general, like, what's it like being a chef?
Well, I don't know if this is the case anymore, but I think some people might have like on like media, there's kind of romanticized idea of what a chef is like. And some chefs have been very great in kind of dispelling that notion. Like everyone loved Anthony Bourdain for that, or Gordon Ramsay, like celebrity chefs who have kind of discussed the less savory, if I can make a bad joke, aspects about being a chef. And so I jotted down ideas because I tend to rant, so I'm like a very writing oriented person. So I wrote,
oh my god, you're so prepared.
Otherwise I'll just go off the rails. So I was thinking in terms of like work conditions, what it's like being a chef. And so the feelings that I have as a chef is the environment is very hot and sweaty and loud and confusing and like dirty. When I was training in school, it's these very nice, idealized, kind of pristine conditions, and you have these beautiful labs that you've like paid for, and they're just lovely. And everyone's nice, and like you have like space, and like you clean at the end, and you get your grade, and you go home, and that's it. And it's very lovely. And then you go to work in a real kitchen, and you're like, oh, it's not like that. And so the like actions that are important as a chef is like you need to multitask, you need to know how to lead people, but you also need to know when to follow people, and you need to have really, really good communication. You're constantly talking, you're constantly discussing different things with people and like making sure people know where you are. It's very communication orientated. And the ideals, I think, that are associated with being a chef, which are true, and like I think the media does get right, is that you have to be honest about like your capacity, other people's capacity, what is being put on the plate. Of course, teamwork, it's very team orientated. You need to have high standards. The creativity aspect is really fun, but that doesn't always happen because at the end of the day, you're just doing the same thing over and over again. So it's kind of more like an assembly line than making the next best, beautiful, unique dish for the average chef. I mean, I'm just speaking as kind of like an average grunt. Definitely didn't work at any Michelin star restaurants. I didn't like run any giant hotel kitchens. I wasn't like a management kind of person all the time. Sometimes you just cooking food for the average person at the average restaurant to like pay your bills, and lots of people do that, and there's nothing wrong with it. And you want to be fast, you want to be efficient, and you want to be clean. Those like last three are really the most important kind of skills that you gain as a chef. And then I kind of wrote some like good things about being a chef and some bad things about being a chef, if that like is what you guys are interested in hearing about.
Hot takes.
Cool. So the good thing is you meet lots of interesting people, you learn from different people. I always like to say you can learn something from anybody. I've learned tricks from people who are like seasoned pros, have been in the industry for years, and I've met tricks from people, it's like their first week, and this is something that their grandmother used to do. There's always something to learn, so you should always be like open-minded to listen to people. You make really close friendships really quickly because you're just working with people all the time, and you kind of sometimes you have to get through like a really hard service together, and it just makes you really close together. So I've made some good friendships, which has been nice. You gain a really hard work ethic, you gain a thick skin, you get used to criticism, and that's okay. You can work anywhere in the world. I've gotten to do some cool cooking work in Indonesia. I got to work in Australia. I worked at different places in Canada. You, of course, eat amazing food. Best pro. I love that. Nice, fresh, seasonable food. You get to play with really cool ingredients. That's like a really fun part about cooking. And you get to learn about cities in like a really different way, like a really fun way. You learn the kind of hot spots that people go to, and you know them from the inside because you know the people that work there, you know, kind of their dirty secrets. It's a fun way to like get to know a city. I've really found that way to be true. And of course, there's the bad, which is why I'm not doing it anymore. The thing that a lot of people don't talk about is that there's like no breaks, and the pay is generally quite low. It's a lot of hard work, and you don't really get a lot out of it. You don't get the same, well, you get a lot out of it, but you don't get the same creature comforts as like, say, an office job. The labor laws are very loosely regulated in kitchens, which is kind of like an unfortunate fact, which is why you see, it's kind of like a young guy's game. You don't see a lot of older chefs, you don't see a lot of family chefs. To get better work conditions, if you are an older chef, you tend to have to sacrifice a lot. You have to stay in the game for a long time, you have to work really hard. For example, lots of career chefs work, every holiday and can't see their families a lot. And I've had chefs at school say that very explicitly, like it's really difficult to have a family if that's what's important to you, if you want to be a chef for a career. It's definitely male dominated, and it's a hierarchical system. So the classic brigade system that's kind of a standard across kitchens around the world is based off of like military formation.
Okay. Did not know.
Which is cool. The history of cooking is like really interesting. It used to be very different like 100 years ago compared to now, or 200 years ago. There's definitely like lingering sexism and misogyny. There's kind of like a masochistic kind of attitude, and there's definitely a separation between men and women because women tend to be servers and chefs tend to be men. So there's power at play, and it's always weird being a woman in like a male dominated world, but that's changing. There's more and more girls who are becoming chefs, and that's great. But it's also hard to find a lady chef to work under. I've seen very few. And I think the worst is a lot of people who own restaurants don't actually have experience as people who are working in the restaurants. Sometimes it's people who just have the money and they have the romantic idea of, oh, I've always wanted to have a restaurant, but the margins are very slim and the work conditions are very difficult. So you get not always the best ownership, not always the best management. So it leads to unsustainable practices.
I think one thing I learned was my dad was advising a restaurant, and he said to the owner that if you want a restaurant, you need to know how to cook too. Yeah, you can't just be like the guy that's the manager and like tells you everything, because like, what if the chef is sick, or like what if somebody needs to leave and all that. And I think there is a misconnection between food on your plate but then food actually outside, if that makes sense.
There's a difference between food on your plate and food actually outside. Can you like expand on that a little bit?
I guess like food coming to your plate. Like if you see food on your plate, you're just like, yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah, there's a disconnect between the process of making food and like the food that like is placed in front of you.
Yeah, there you go. This is why she's our host. My brain secret went so hard. Yeah, there's so big difference on that, but people don't really see it.
Yeah, and I think that's like, you've totally hit the nail on the head, Mars, because that's very emblematic of the food system in general. When we get an apple, we don't consider like all the things that are at play with making that apple.
Yeah. So is that how you came to be in the food, like pursuing food as a career, or how exactly did you end up pursuing food in general as a career?
So around like year 3, 4, 5, like maybe around year 4, I was still pretty fresh. I was still like a little baby chef. And I was working at like a really big premium casual dining restaurant, we'll call it. Very large, one of the largest ones in Canada for that company. I won't say the name, but you can probably imagine what it's like. And there was just so much food waste that was happening that I was looking at. And because organics is no one is required to have composted food. There is some regulation when it comes to like garbage delivery and recycling delivery, but the green bin system is still kind of changing. It's essentially like a cost. It's another cost in the long line of costs for restaurant owners. And so I saw a lot of like waste and like bad disposal techniques. And around that time, my brother had gotten me The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan. He's a journalist, I think, for the New York Times, but he wrote a book. I think they did a documentary. He's in a documentary. It's really good, but he talked a lot about kind of the broad food system issues of the time that still exist today. And I was just kind of like feeling not very particularly happy about the industry. I was kind of seeing some of the labor issues that are persistent. I was seeing a lot of waste, and I was reading this kind of more abstract concepts of like our broader food system, and kind of like maybe I want to look more at this. Maybe like this one career trajectory is not going to be sustainable for me in the long run. Maybe I should start training for something otherwise and see how that goes. And that's kind of led me where I am today.
Yeah, so we get the sense that food is like a really complicated topic. And so how do we, like, one of the questions we want to ask was how exactly do we think of food, and how does our background change that?
Right. How do we think of food, and how does our background change that? What did I write in my notes? Let's see.
You're probably the most prepared guest ever.
I think it's truly because I really ramble things off the rails, and it helps me like feel prepared and feel calm. Anyways, I think all I wrote, because maybe I was tired when I was writing this, but I wrote culture, geographic context, the types of foods and the climate that you grow up in, your education about food, your income, your values, and just your personal experience with food. Well, food is very complicated, and I was kind of writing in my notes, I was ruminating about this, and there's kind of like our descriptive notions of food, like what food is, and there's our like normative notions of food, like what food should be. And all of these background things that I listed off can all kind of impact how we answer those questions and what we prioritize. And that's kind of how I see it. I don't think that there's any right way of seeing food. No one's really like, there's no truth, it's all very different depending on who you are and where you are, and your priorities and the type of food that's being grown. I have my own ideas, but they're definitely not the only answer out there. Yeah, what do you guys think about that? Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's essentially true, right? The background that we come from, like our culture, our economic status, can really influence our relationship with food. And I know people have very different relationships with food depending on like what food you were exposed to growing up as well. So even between my sister and I, we grew up with the same culture, same food, but we probably have a very different relationship with different foods. For one, she doesn't eat vegetables, and
my heart. Okay, you don't have to eat vegetables.
And I just love, I know I have difficult times with food depending on the season, but I find like whenever I go to farmers markets and you really talk to people who make their own food, it's a very different relationship, and it just kind of, adds a bright spot to your relationship with food. It's still a relationship at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think mine changed when I moved to Germany, actually. I remember my mom trying to buy rice. By rice, I mean Indonesian rice, like as much as 8-10 kilos of rice.
Yeah.
And my dad stopping her, be like, that's like at least 50 euros or something. Oh, my mom's like, what, really? Because they would come in cups in Germany, I think, back then. I don't know what year this was, but that changed food, the way we see food, because then we saw like ramen, Indomie as like precious, not because it's cheap and all that, but because it came from our home country and it tastes nice, I guess. And so it tastes like home. And
yeah.
People would my mom learned how to make apple cake. Like that's the one thing she learned, and that's a way my mom associated with herself with food, like German food, because she's like, oh, this is all like potatoes and
Yeah.
what can I do? But then they're like, oh, you can do this and you can do that. I think that really changed, especially when I came home. I was really confused because my parents would eat like, my parents and grandma and grew up in Germany, so they would like eat bread, you know. And then there's my mom's side of family is like, let's get like fried rice and like congee and all that.
Yeah.
And that intersection really confused me, but also like changed my relationship with food, because that made me think about like, oh, what certain foods can I eat and cannot eat, as in like, you know, where I am. Because when I came back from Germany, then I missed all this German food that I never thought about or like thought was boring. Just kind of funny.
No, 100%. Yeah, you're like, I remember when I was in Australia, I like really missed poutine. I don't really eat it that much when I'm here because it's
right.
And then I missed it so much. They don't make the type of cheese over there.
Curds, yeah.
Yeah, they don't make curds because like you can get them in Wisconsin. It's definitely like a North American thing. Maybe it's also in the UK. Probably. Maybe.
Is it?
We have something called squeaky cheese, but I have no idea what it is. Oh,
is that the same thing?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's like, I mean, if maybe it's the same thing, but it'll be like kind of lumpy shaped, or it might be like chopped up. And if you bite into it, it's squeaky.
My God.
In Ontario, actually, we don't even have that. I think it's only in Quebec because their food laws are a little bit different. So when you refrigerate the cheese, it loses the squeak. It's like something about how the proteins are formed. And I think all of the cheese curds that we get are previously refrigerated for food safety laws, but in Depanneurs in Montreal, you can get them like, they're just like on the table and they're good for about 24 hours or so.
Fresh out of the cow.
Yeah. So all that to say, I missed it so much that I learned how to make cheese, and I made cheese in Australia.
Really?
Yeah, and I have pictures of it, and like it took much longer than I thought it did, but it was so worth it. I made gravy, and I like brought it to like the restaurant I was working at. I was like, oh my God, guys, try this. Like, this is like my national dish. I really miss it. And it was with them, but I was also up till like 3 a.m. being like, I regret this. This was such a bad idea. Why did I decide to make cheese? Like at 10 p.m. It was so stupid.
It sounds really difficult.
My close friend made cheese for our science project. She was so happy about it. She literally shared the whole class. It's an accomplishment. So.
It is. Yeah, I hadn't made cheese since like school, but yeah. Anyways, it was a nice memory. I got to borrow some of the bacterial culture from a coworker at the time, and it was good just to like connect with them over food that way and talk about cheese making.
Yeah, it's so hard and it can go wrong in so many different ways so fast.
Mm-hmm. And you're like, I mean, you're dealing with like 16 liters of milk for like a small batch, so you're like, I really hope I don't mess this up, because then I have so much garbage.
So you talked previously about researching where your food comes from, but why should we actually care where our food comes from? And how do we do that kind of research that you do on like the foods that we consume?
Oh man. Well, the first part of your question, the why should we care, I think is easier to answer than the how we can learn about the foods that we eat. So I'll say that first.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I think we should definitely care about what we eat, because we do it every day. It's important to us. I mean, it may not be important to you, but it's important because it's nourishing for your body. It's important because it has a connection to the people that bring it to you. It's important because it is connection to the land that surrounds you. So it has, a story, a connection. And because it's connected to land and people, there are different political and social and economic implications and cultural implications to the things that you consume. And I mean, unless anyone else has figured this out, we have to consume it if we're so lucky to. Not everyone has that privilege. And so that's why I think that we should do it. But at the same time, you don't have to care every day. And how you care the way you care about food doesn't have to be the same way that I care about food, if that makes sense. So like sometimes caring is just enjoying its flavor, just enjoying how it's made, enjoying where it comes from, enjoying its history. And I think that's why like a lot of chefs really like food. They really care about kind of honoring the food that they do. And sometimes caring is just eating a balanced diet, trying your best to just nourish your body and make you happy on the inside and enjoy it that way. And that's also very fine. That's totally okay. Sometimes caring about food is a spiritual and cultural practice. I don't have those practices myself. I wasn't raised that way. Like we just ate food and enjoyed it for its flavor. But for other people, it's a familial thing, it's a spiritual thing, and eating it is an important tradition, and it fulfills those needs, and that's okay too, because it's good to do that. Sometimes caring is just sharing it with other people. I always like to say it's not a party until food is there. I really do believe that. And sharing is a really important thing culturally. I mean, I think so. I think if you like are friends with someone and you're like, hey, do you want a bite of this? Like and they say, yeah, I would like that. It's like you become a little bit closer, in my opinion. And then sometimes caring is just like being mindful or thankful that like this thing that you are hopefully able to eat, it took energy, it took time, it took money. It took a lot of just different things intersecting to make it possible, and just like understanding that it happens, and like, you're fortunate or you worked hard to do it and to eat it, and like just being okay with that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the whole cultural aspect really reminds me of my home country, because the neighborhood I lived back in Bandung was actually mostly like Muslim oriented and all that. So my aunt used to celebrate Ramadan all the time. Like she would make it and everyone would eat it, and nobody would question like what their religion was or whatever, but it's just like the month. And so we would make all the food, and it was really important because people do like really, really celebrate their religion, really feels appreciated because like we're doing this stuff, And that's the same in Christmas, I think.
Totally.
Christmas there is not many Christians back home, but Christmas is a big thing that we celebrate everywhere, even though, nobody can explain to me where the Christmas tree is from, but the food is great.
Where did it come from?
Actually, I think it came from Germany, but it's not like white color. My dad told me a story, but my dad's kind of like a walking Wikipedia. It was like, it's a commercial. It's like Santa Claus, basically, sort of.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I'm definitely I wasn't raised a Christian. I'm not a current practicing Christian, but my family still celebrates Christmas, and we definitely have like a Christmas dinner, and like we have a Christmas breakfast when we open our presents. Like it's just this nice tradition that we have, and the food that goes along with it. And yeah, I think that's really important. Do you have any traditions?
Food traditions.
Tradition?
Cakes. I guess we eat mooncakes during Mooncake Festival, but I'm not
Oh,
sure
yeah.
if we do it because it's the Mooncake Festival or because it's an excuse to eat mooncakes.
I mean, it can be both.
Well, I know my teacher gives me mooncake only because I did my Mandarin homework correctly. So I don't know. She would actually bribe me with it if you do your homework.
Mooncakes are very interesting because they come from there's this actual mythology behind it. I don't really specifically know about it, or I don't really specifically remember it. But I remember my mom telling oh, if you've got the salted egg yolk inside, then it's good luck, which is why a lot of families will buy the double egg yolk or the single egg yolk one. But then some families were like, that thing is very high in sugar and cholesterol. Like egg yolks, like salted egg yolks are high in cholesterol.
Oh yeah.
So they would swap it out for more creative ones. I know Haagen-Dazs in Asia does what they call snow mooncakes, which is essentially it's an ice cream mochi mooncake.
Ooh, that just sounds
Really? How have I not heard of this?
Mars is confused.
What?
That sounds devastatingly good.
My teacher lied to me.
I mean, it's not like your teacher could have brought ice cream to like your classroom. It would have melted.
Yeah,
And
that's
plus,
true.
they're usually not cheap.
No, they're not. She made us share it. Obviously, some people don't share it, but she made us share it.
Mm-hmm.
I know
then-
we're approaching Mooncake Festival as well, so a lot of families are learning how to make their own mooncakes at home.
Yeah, that's true.
Is there always there's like a stamp on them, right? Is it
It's not a specific, yeah, I think I know what you're talking about, but it's not a specific stamp. So with mooncakes, there's an actual mold for it that people use, and not everyone uses the same mold. Like if you've got the Haagen-Dazs one, it'll say Haagen-Dazs across it.
Okay, that part is lame. Everything else sounds great.
And then there's also like a really big culture around dumplings as well,
Ooh.
Oh yeah, I guess so.
and the different shapes as well. So
the
yeah.
what shapes?
the shapes of the dumplings. So you've got the crescent shaped ones, the ones that are got kind of the mermaid tail ones, and then you've got the if you've ever been to like any dim sum restaurant, then you've seen the kind of roundish shape with the really like lots and lots of folds. I know a specific number of folds is like good fortune as well.
Yeah.
Ironically, I learned how to do it in Nepal.
Oh, for momos.
Yeah, they taught us how to make momos, and I really like mastered it. I remember it till now, but it's just weird that I'm learning how to make Chinese dumplings from Nepal is all.
It's
I
funny.
love momos.
I do too, and dumplings. That's really cool that you had that experience. I think I've done some like cooking classes abroad, and I had a really great time doing them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I made a note on the why we should care about food that I just want to reiterate that I think is important to say. I was saying before how caring can kind of be more politically, socially, and environmentally orientated, depending on how you look at it. And so caring about food takes on kind of a moral imperative or an ethical paradigm, which I personally, like I try my best to kind of be mindful of that when I'm able to. And I guess the idea is that if we care about our food, we can choose some actions and perhaps enact change, large or small. But again, I think it's important to acknowledge your positionality when it comes to food and like understand like the hierarchies of power that like you possess and you exist within, and your like capacity or ability or like desire to interact with the food chain that way. Oh, and it's really difficult to do that because the food chain is very complicated, it's very big, and it's very opaque, which I guess I just forgot to answer the other part of your question, which is like, how do we do that? And so it depends on like the desire, like what you want to do if you do want to enact change. What I described before in terms of like how caring can exist, sometimes it's like an internal thing and like you can kind of integrate it into your practices of eating and sharing and like being mindful of it and like the foods that you make. And sometimes it's more like how you structure your actions as a consumer. And so you can, change what you buy, like we discussed before. You can choose not to buy red meat, you can choose not to buy seafood, you can choose to be a vegetarian or a vegan. And sometimes it's like where you shop. And so some people choose to shorten the supply chain by buying locally as best they can, meeting the people that grow the food, so going to farmers markets, growing the food themselves. But again, just to reiterate, like your positionality is really important in all of this, and not everybody can enact the same amount of change as everybody else.
Hey everyone, Hanne here, pausing the podcast to add something important that I forgot to mention because hey, food is a complicated subject. While responsible consumption is one way to engage with food system sustainability, it's crucial to take political action if you have the capacity to do so. Some examples include looking critically at agricultural policies, supporting politicians who promote sustainable practices, raising awareness on issues in food equity, volunteering for grassroots organizations involved in food justice, and learning more about the work being done at the local level in your city. As always, understand how your positionality shapes your role in these systems of powers. Perhaps you can leverage your own privilege or join a network of collective change. Now let's return back to the podcast.
Just consumerism is definitely really interesting in terms of like how it plays with like the food that we eat. And I know for one, I learned from a video from Bon Appetit that like eating fish, let's say, eating fish that are in the lower trophic levels, was it?
Yeah.
Eating fish from the lower trophic levels. So basically, if the fish is vegetarian, amazing.
Yeah.
If the fish eats other fish, it's not as good as eating the ones that are essentially vegan or vegetarian because they just eat plants. And there's multiple reasons for this, right? They say like we shouldn't be overfishing things like salmon and tuna and mackerel. But then aside from that, there's also the fact that they're smaller, so they accumulate less mercury, is it?
Yes. That's 100% correct. So generally in like a ecological system with trophic levels, the lower trophic level will have a larger amount of these like small fish or herbivores. And as you go up the predation scale, the numbers of these fish will go smaller and smaller. So when we eat something like tuna, that's actually like a predator that's really high on the trophic level, or sharks. And so everything is important in that ecological web. But if you destroy the smaller number of predatory fish and animals, it can be really devastating for the overall health of the ecosystem, which is why generally I try not to eat fish. You can also farm, but aquaculture also has an impact on the land, depending on how the aquaculture is done. Again, I'm very lazy, so I just don't bother, which may not be the right answer. Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's why I don't eat red meat either, and I try not to eat pork. I try to eat, chicken, eggs, and I try to eat as much vegetarian food as I can for that reason. It's mostly environmental reasons, but some people choose to not do that because of moral and ethical reasons about animal, what's the word? Animal
rights?
Yeah.
But then there's also that other argument of, let's say that you do want to eat bird meat. What are the maybe ethical and environmental implications of eating wild game versus farmed birds?
The moral and ethical considerations?
Moral and maybe environmental implications.
That's a great question. Well, first I should state, like, I'm definitely more privy to, I understand more about vegetable agriculture than I do, say, livestock agriculture, and I know even less about hunting. So I don't know very much about like the regulation of hunting, which countries' regulations comparatively to other countries. Morally, like, my choice to not eat animals is not out of a desire to like lessen suffering of animals, which is kind of mean, but it's true. I care more about the environmental implications, and that's just like my bias. So I can't really comment particularly on whether or not someone should hunt. I think it's okay for people to hunt, and for many people, hunting is like a very, very, very important cultural thing for our First Nations in Canada. It's associated with like the history of their land that they live on, and so I would never tell someone to like not hunt. I mean, how people choose to regulate environmentally the like health of that system is I hope that people are doing that. I don't really know much about it. Do you guys? What are your thoughts on that?
I think as long as they're not hunting for sport, then it should be okay. Because there's a lot of people who just essentially hunt for trophy animals, and that's absolutely horrendous. But then the people who essentially we are what scientists call hunter-gatherers. We do hunt for animals and we do gather our own stuff, which is why I think foraging is such an interesting topic as well.
Yeah, foraging is really cool. I mean, to go back to hunting, I don't think hunting is any more cruel than how we deal with factory farming and CAFOs, which is like high intensity livestock. I think I'm not an animal, but arguably that's a lot worse than like killing an animal when it's like in its own native environment. Although nature can be cruel too. To give you a counterpoint about trophy hunting, which will really spin your gears, is in some cases, some conservationists have argued that trophy hunting has an important role for funding, because these really wealthy people will come sometimes to countries and pay a lot of money to trophy hunt, and that money is used for conservation efforts, which is crazy and kind of dystopian, but it kind of brings attention to the fact that conservation is a costly thing. You know, money is unfortunately part of this social ecological system that we've constructed.
Hello again, listeners. It's Hanne jumping in with another small but important edit. I wanted to express that today, both conservation and land use rights related to hunting and fishing are impacted by laws, norms, and borders that emerge from colonialism. This is a global phenomenon that affects Indigenous peoples' sovereignty and autonomy. For example, the Sipekne'katik Nation's access to lobster is currently being challenged in Nova Scotia. If you're interested in this subject, I recommend seeking out the work and teachings from people within BIPOC communities first, as they are uniquely qualified in their expertise. With that said, let's go back to the podcast.
Yeah, that's definitely more of a complex topic than I thought it originally was.
Oh, that's a spinning brain there.
But then let's switch over to maybe more agricultural practices then.
Sure.
I listened once to a podcast, a snippet of a podcast by someone who is a forager, and she said that it's better for people to forage because essentially what you're taking is a piece of an ecosystem. While she said that some practices such as just clearing land to make one very specific crop, such as spinach, may not actually be as sustainable as people think. So what are your thoughts on that?
Wait, can you guys explain what foraging is?
Okay, foraging is, it takes, I admit, as someone who did study plants my entire life, foraging requires more brain work than you think it does. Because you have to be able to identify plants in order to know whether it's poisonous or not, if you're eating the right plant or not.
I see.
Because essentially what you're doing is you're going into the environment and you're taking berries, stems, leaves, seeds, and stuff like that, mushrooms, and then coming back. But you also have to be sure that you leave enough for the plant to essentially still grow and reproduce.
Yeah, I think that last part is what's really key. I think, what this person is saying is on like a very broad level, very true. Absolutely, leaving a natural system intact and choosing to forage like carefully and responsibly, provided that like you and the people who follow you are like respecting that balance. Yeah, I think that's definitely probably more environmentally friendly than clear cutting or clearing a space and then placing what is a monoculture. I would say that's like an easy, that's better.
You know, it's really tricky though, because I've seen, I have an eye for detail with plants. So I can sometimes, if I've encountered the plant before, then I know how to identify it. The problem is if you're seeing it through a video, it's very, very different from actually like foraging in real life. And I know like some people are not as keen to these kind of details in plants and they might accidentally poison themselves.
Yeah, it definitely takes practice that I haven't even like begun. I do enjoy foraging. I really like doing like nature walks and having people help me identify plants. It's really cool. I did like a mushroom foraging class once and that was really cool. But I guess it depends on the people who follow you and you yourself, understanding like what an unbalanced system would look like. And would the average forager understand like the land around them to that degree? I personally wouldn't. But again, on a broad level, I mean, yes, probably a monocultural agricultural system that like is what used to be a forest would be a lot less environmentally friendly.
Mars, would you ever forage?
I think I would be dead first. Let's say that.
You can go berry picking, you know, get some blackberries, find some wild strawberries.
Well, I've done
Yeah,
that.
my friend did that. She walked around my uni campus and started plucking apples and blackcurrants, and we just ate while we were walking around campus.
Yeah.
I've done it with friends, so I would never do it alone. I would really be dead first. I'm not lying.
I know, like, there was one plant that I was looking into that I wanted to go foraging for, but I still cannot tell the difference between that and its like poisonous counterparts, and it's called wild garlic.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like garlic can be poisonous.
No, so there's a plant called wild garlic, but it looks very similar to a couple other plants, and one of those couple other plants is really toxic.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, I get.
Yeah, I think you can forage. I don't know if you can forage the root from Queen Anne's lace, but you can forage the flowers. But there's also, I think it looks similar to poison hemlock. Don't quote me on that. I could just be making that up. But it also looks like a lot of different plants. It's a very, like, it's not very unique. It looks similar to a large species of plants.
I guess go with an educated friend, guys.
Yes. Yeah. And especially with mushroom hunting. Don't mushroom hunt on your own if you're not familiar. Very, very, very familiar. Very
no.
familiar. Don't do that. You will get sick.
I know, like, I've noticed this. If you go to Asia and you've gone through like the forest, it is actually quite easy to identify certain plants. But when you go to like Europe and North American regions, most plants look the same.
Yeah?
And
Really? You think
they
so?
look more alike. There's less distinctive, like, for example, most people won't be able to tell the difference between a papaya and a tapioca plant. But papaya, because they have the same lobes, like they have large lobe.
Oh
like,
yeah,
leaves.
they do.
But papaya plants grow on like tall trees,
Yeah.
while tapioca plants tend to just be slim and the branches are red. So it is a lot easier to identify. But in Europe, everything just kind of looks the same. Like wild garlic looks the same as like some other plant the forager was talking about, and that looks very similar to just like general lilies in general. So it's, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Mushrooms, especially colorful ones, don't forage on your own.
No.
You're clear of that.
I know most people will steer clear of colorful mushrooms, but there is one edible one, I think, called like indigo cap, was it? Or ink caps. And they're very dark and blue in color, but apparently they're edible. So just don't go alone.
Yeah, it's one of those things like the fish. I'm like, it's too complicated. I don't have the time or resources to figure it out. I'm just not going to do it right now. But even very seasoned mushroom foragers will, like, if there's something that they're not sure about, there's different like steps you can take to like come as close as possible to being very, very sure that it's like the one that you want. So like you can do a spore print where you like let it sit on a piece of paper and it will release the spores, and different mushrooms that look similar will have different spore prints, which is really cool. I didn't know that before. And they'll like talk to their friends and be like, do you think that this is this? Do you like think the gills look like this thing, or do you think it looks like this other species? Yeah. So always be careful. Talk to your friends.
Your educated friends. You're repeating.
Yeah.
I think I remember watching one, like a mushroom foraging video where the person said, so don't do what I do, but I self-taught myself to forage mushrooms. I'm just like, no, don't do that.
No, that's not enough.
Oh no.
Right, we should probably wrap this up.
Already, guys, this went so quickly.
We can do one more.
We could end with like, what are you guys excited to do with food in like the future?
I'm excited to try ingredients that I've never tried before.
Ingredients.
Especially mushrooms. I love mushrooms. So just trying new ingredients, trying like different fruits, different vegetables that I've never tried before. Maybe talk to someone who knows how to cook them. I know I've seen so many videos on indigenous foods in like America and Canada, and I really want to know what the flavor of that is like, untempered with like kind of the general American flavors.
Mhm.
And the ingredients they have I know are kind of endangered, so those ingredients and flavors I want to play with. I don't know. What about you, Mars?
Me? I just want more Indonesian food. Yo, Canada, what's up? We have a lot of Indonesians here. I guess what I'm saying is,
You're gonna open a restaurant and do it.
Yeah.
and quit school. I'm gonna. No, it's been 17 years. Anyway, I guess thinking about more about like food security in the sense of Asian flavors, I think, because I think the first thing I moved here, when I asked if there's any like Indonesian store, they always told me to go to Indian stores because they're really similar. Which is kind of sad to me because first of all, I don't even know the names in English, so that's already like gone.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know, thinking about food security more, because I did a lot of thinking about it back in high school, but I don't know, I never thought about it anymore. But now with COVID, right, getting food is quite hard, and it's very apparent now more than ever because you can only go as much as you can, not to endanger your roommates, your family, and all that. Which comes back to you. I think you're doing cool stuff, right? On that? No, I'm not on that, but like on food.
Yeah. My research will hopefully unveil some answers about food security or food relief, which isn't exactly the same thing. So I'm going to be, hopefully, we'll see how research goes with COVID, but I'm hoping to measure through surveys the social service provision and storage capacity of food relief agencies in the GTA. And with those surveyed results, I hope to code them, probably to see the impact of COVID on catchment areas within the GTA, because I can't study the whole GTA, so I'll probably just focus on certain wards or certain areas. And then to display this information through GIS to kind of get a sense of any geospatial patterns, see if there's any positive or negative relationships between those two things. So I'm really excited about that. I hope to learn more about the resiliency of cities in the era of the pandemic. I did like a reading course and kind of looked at that a little bit, and I hope to learn more about integrating equity into my research, to creating research that is useful and implementable to the practitioners who are creating food relief efforts at an institutional level and also at a grassroots level. Always keeping in mind my own positionality and trying to be responsible in how I conduct research during a very sensitive time with an always very sensitive subject. So that's my hope with food right now. And also try new ingredients, of course. Try and find more Indonesian food, of course, because it's like the most underrated food in the world, in my opinion.
Please.
Woohoo! We look forward to reading your paper when it comes out.
Yeah, and all the stuff you'll do with food. But thank you for coming here, and I wish all the best, especially now that I don't know when this is gonna come out, but whatever school is hitting you down, remember food is very important and it comes somewhere, and I hope to see you next week.
Next class. Yeah, thank you for having me, and I hope I did an okay job. I had a lot of fun. I hope I didn't sound bad.
No.
Sounds fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys.
Support your local farmers. Bye.
Hello, hi. Thank you for listening to the Peak Boredom Podcast. This is Mars and Inga signing off, and don't forget to tune in next week. please. Bye.